I want to start with something I heard you say in another interview because I was watching some of your interviews in preparation for this, where you said that the idea behind Solana was a engineering idea, not a marketing idea. So take us through that origin philosophy, if you can.
So I'm an engineer by trade. I spent most of my career at Qualcomm working on operating systems, protocols, optimizing things, making things faster. And around 2017 is when smart contracts, I think, really came to the forefront. And because I spent most of my time in embedded systems, there's actually a lot of parallels looking at Ethereum at the time and how resource constrained that system was. You had this great new platform for building financial applications that could actually minimize risk in software to the point that you can trust it with money. That was a brand new thing that never existed before, but it was very relatively slow and constrained. You can do 7 to 11 transactions per second, and as the legend goes, this actually did happen. I was at Cafe Soleil in San Francisco at 2 coffees and a beer, and that didn't sit well with me. I was up till 4 in the morning and had this eureka moment, applying a lot of parallels from TDMA, which is kind of one of the first cellular protocols, one of the first optimizations that folks did with radio, to blockchain. And my back of the envelope kind of calculations where it's 1,000 times faster. And that's really what pushed me out the door to go build Solana. But making something faster doesn't mean that you know what it's for, what it's going to be used for. And we kind of instinctively called it blockchain and NASDAQ speed because we thought a new use case that maybe this performance opens up is trading and being able to globally guarantee that you have the same markets and the same market information available everywhere, that everyone can access them permissionlessly, everyone can create markets and trade them. And, all these things actually came true in retrospect, but the path that we took was really unexpected. None of us could foresee that NFTs would be a thing or things like that.
I want to stick with things that I've heard you say because I think these are very salient about Solana and your personal philosophy. You also said that in the process of building Solana, you weren't trying to reinvent the wheel, that you were looking for existing computer science, existing computer software design to build Solana. Take us through that and take us through why you made that decision.
A lot of our advantages came from, I think, because myself and most of the team were very experienced engineers. Most of us had more than 10 plus years building software at scale. And we were competing actually with a lot of teams that were, I think, more academic and kind of came out of universities. And we took an approach where we used as much off-the-shelf solutions that we could, including for example, the virtual machine actually came from the Linux kernel. It's the BPF VM, which is proven at scale to be high performance. So just those little decisions, I think, was why we were able to ship much faster with a smaller team. We didn't have to raise as much. And being first to market with a new thing, I think, is worth a lot. I think if you talk to startups and you kind of see which startups survive and which don't, you can look at even OpenAI's, I think, is the most recent great example. They were first to market with a GPT implementation, and even if others catch up, it's very hard to dislodge the market leader. And we were, I think, the first high-performance chain to launch. We launched what we thought was almost the worst time in the world. This was March 2020, right after kind of the double black swan, the Bitcoin and S&P 500 crashed 60%. NBA was canceled, so I couldn't watch the Warriors. But we were done, and we could launch the product, and we felt that you can never time the market, but the worst time to launch is right before this kind of crash. So given that it just happened, it seemed like maybe it is the best time. And in retrospect, a lot of our competitors kind of froze up, I think, or maybe hung back and took a little longer to see how the markets played out, and that gave us that 3-month window to establish Solana as a brand for high performance blockchain applications.
It's such an interesting point from an entrepreneur's perspective, because you know, Reid Hoffman once said to me, if you're waiting for the website to be perfect, then you've waited too long to launch. And so you guys got out there, were first mover. Like everything in life, there were some glitches and some outages. So take us through your management and leadership style, going through some of those speed bumps that you experienced, and what did you learn from that? And talk about the stability of the network after that.
Oh, for sure. So Elon is one of my favorite engineers, and I mean, his philosophy is you ship and iterate as fast as you can. And we were always paranoid about safety and high performance. And those are the two kind of most important variables that we were optimizing for. So if we had downtime, it was because we took a lot of engineering risk to both optimize for both safety and high performance at the same time. And you fix those bugs and you iterate, and you kind of build a lot of shared trauma with the engineers. This actually kind of carries you through a lot of future challenges, because those folks that work closely together through those like nights and weekends actually end up gaining seniority much faster than you would in any other traditional environment.
Talk about the stability of the network today and the throughput of the network. Make a comparison for when the network was experiencing outages and where the network is today. I mean, you're probably 6 or 8-fold in terms of the throughput through the...
Yep. So I think it's been nearly 2 years since we had any performance degradation or downtime. So 100% uptime for almost 2 years. And block capacity is almost doubled. So there's now twice as much capacity for transactions. I think on any given day, Solana does more transactions than if you look at the top 50 blockchains combined. Like look at CoinMarketCap and add up the TPS of all those. Solana usually, I think, does more than all those combined. And the other part of it is kind of our most famous ethos is IBRL, increased bandwidth, reduced latency. For finance, especially trading, the latency part is as critical as bandwidth. So reducing latency is, one of the things we're constantly optimizing. The confirmation times are, sub 600 microseconds at the median, milliseconds, sorry. Yeah.
So how should we think of Solana? Is it iOS? Is it the New York Stock Exchange?
I think.
Is it the phone system? Or how would you describe Solana to?
I think it's kind of. I think of it as more if New York Stock Exchange is Microsoft, Solana is the Linux version of that. Because I think for finance is regulated. It's a very kind of system that every sovereign state doesn't want to give up control over. So even if you build a technology that can do finance, you still have to deal with like integrating it with the financial system as it is on the ground in whatever jurisdiction you're in. And if you have an open, transparent, permissionless system that's open source, that means nobody owns it. So the folks in France running Solana nodes have the exact same control over Solana as somebody in the United States, somebody in Abu Dhabi. And because of that, they can actually use it as this trusted neutral layer that they can all communicate and trust each other. And you can't do that with the New York Stock Exchange. That's based in the United States. That technology is sovereign, effectively under the regulators in control in the United States. And that may be a fantastic, great product, but you cannot easily export it everywhere in the world at the same time. So just like kind of Linux opened up operating systems and gave them to everybody in the world, our goal is to do that for finance, for high performance finance. And I think Solana is, the furthest ahead of all the other folks trying to build this and achieved, I think, the most in practice.
So if you don't mind, I want to have a little bit of a speed analogy comparison. So the NASDAQ speeds, Visa, MasterCard speeds, New York Stock Exchange speeds, how does Solana compare?
So there's a bunch of different ways to measure it. One way you can measure it is actually settled trades per day or something like that. Because a lot of the protocols that are built in the New York Stock Exchange are actually very regulated. It's the central limit order book and how market makers communicate it. All those things are effectively fixed by regulators. So you cannot innovate there. The advantage that Solana has is that it's open and transparent and permissionless, and that means developers can innovate much, much faster in that environment. And the protocols that they've built are just much more efficient. So the result is that with less bits, fewer messages, fewer transactions, you can achieve the same amount of actual executed trades per day as New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. I think depending on market conditions, I think it's hit like maybe 50% of actual trades settled of NASDAQ.
You know, when I think about where you are and I think about the regulators, it's a little bit like Field of Dreams. It's like you built it and now we want the regulators to come. You know, they say we'll build it and then they will come. Where do you think global regulation is? Where do you think US regulation is right now?
I think the slowest part in kind of blockchain adoption is the human brain almost. And you know, I grew up with the internet in the 90s, and as a kid, I was just immediately adapted to it. Like I immediately got it, but you know, my parents didn't. And it took him a long time to understand what a link was, like to build that mental model of clicking on a link that it takes you to a different document. So that was, I think, the slowest part of internet adoption is just the human brain adapting to this kind of new data structure that's common. And blockchain is a new data structure. It's a common ledger that represents finance. And it has cryptography primitives that are hard to understand. And it just takes time to adapt, not just for my parents, but for regulators as well. And I think as the industry matures and it shows that it can deliver finance cheaper and faster to consumers with reduced risk of fraud and reduced risk of defaults, and actually show that in practice, which I think it has, you know, repeatedly over the last few years, the regulators want that. They actually that's their job, and they're all actually want to improve the markets that they regulate, and they will adapt this technology. But first they have to understand it, and then they have to see that the theory actually matches what happens in the real world and what matches in practice.
Because you talked about March of 2020, which was a really rough time for most of us in the financial services industry. But I want to talk about March of 2030, because it'll be 10 years after the launch. Where are you? What are you dreaming about when you're manifesting the future for Solana? Where would you like to see it be?
I mean, I'm going to kind of echo a lot of what the folks said right before this panel. I think the world is, you know, something like 500 trillion worth of assets altogether. And if you even look at...
Is Elon going to own half of that or no? Right? No, maybe. Possible.
That's the goal, right? I think the blockchains that survive, the open public blockchains that survive are the ones that will try to tokenize all of it. That doesn't mean that one will actually succeed at that, but I think the only ones that will end up existing by 2030 are the ones that are trying to do that. And if you look at the entire sum of all real world assets and stable coins and everything put together, I think we're at like $500 billion right now. So this is what, 0.1% of the way there. So I think even by 2030, if we're at like 10% of the world's, 10-20% of the world's assets already being tokenized, that would be a very dramatic change to how finance is done. And it's hard for me to actually grasp all the side effects of that. But obviously, what I really want to see is faster, cheaper for consumers, better price discovery for consumers, less fraud and less risk.
Is there things that Solana will need to do over the next 5 years in terms of its software innovation, software adaptation? What are some of the things you're thinking about there?
A lot of this is, again, IBRL, increased bandwidth, reduced latency, and that's kind of our day-to-day motto. Every sprint, there is an improvement in one of those parameters. So I'm actually very confident that any kind of hardware or throughput or latency kind of potential speed bumps or issues by 2030 are going to be solved. But just like any technology, it's never really done. So every 2 years, you get an improvement in hardware from TSMC, better process, better chips. You'll always have more work. So we're never going to, there's always going to be engineers improving it, but none of the problems that are going to arise from scaling to support all of the world's finance or, supporting all of the world's assets are insurmountable. Like all of this stuff in my mind is already kind of downhill as far as engineering is concerned.
One of the things I've always admired about you is that you're not in competition with anybody. You're just extremely focused on the engineering process and so forth. But if you were to make a comparison to other chains, you don't necessarily have to name them, what was the competitive advantage that you were looking for? Speed is one of them, certainly, but there's also usability, right? And ease of use, right?
I am actually very competitive. I love sports, so I kind of look at any transaction that exists somewhere else should be running on Solana instead. So we're all competing, and that's good. I think actually the industry improves from competition. It's the best way to improve technologies when we can all compete.
Well, you're a gentleman about it. I never see you like going after anybody, but.
And I want to win. I like winning. I think I think the key parts that we unlocked for usability were actually pretty simple. It is just speed and cost to users. I think those two are so important that if you have friction in terms of cost, and even if it's intermittent friction, like once in a while the fees spike or something like that, that really could break a lot of business models. That could break a lot of users. If you're a merchant and you're selling coffee, you can't have your on-chain fees, like your processing fees, spike to $1 all of a sudden, even if that is intermittent, because all of a sudden your business is effectively down for that day. So from our perspective, guaranteeing a quality of service in terms of how fast transactions execute and how cheap they can execute, those two are kind of the key, most important parts for UX.
Well, it's such a great message for everybody. Listen, as you know, I'm a very big bull on Solana. We own a lot of Solana at Skybridge, and congratulations on your success. And I'm looking forward to being a long-term holder of Solana, and I'm looking forward to sitting down with you in March of 2030.
For sure.
Discuss the great things that you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.